President Lee Jae Myung is scheduled to sit down with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump at the White House on August 25th for talks to advance their alliance and economic partnership. With more up next. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It is Tuesday, August 12th here in South Korea. I'm Min Sunhee. Now, following his hosting of the Vietnamese political leader here in Seoul this week, President Lee Jae Myung is poised to depart for the U.S. for talks with his American counterpart Donald Trump, amid speculation about a possible summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba either before or after the much anticipated meeting, that is, at the White House. For more on this, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be back.
I also have Professor Choi Hyun Jin at Kyung Hee University live on the line. Professor Choi, it's good to have you on.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Right, we will start here in the studio. Raphael, so President Lee Jae Myung will sit down with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump on August 25th at the White House. Now, this was confirmed by the top office here. What else has been shared about the agenda ahead?
Right, so I don't think we know too much at the moment, but Lee's office has confirmed the summit will focus on developing the US-South Korea alliance into a comprehensive strategic alliance and advancing partnerships in semiconductors, batteries, shipbuilding, and critical materials. This is, of course, off the back of the tariff deal that was reached last week. And I suppose we will see a few more details emerging in the next week and a half about what exact agenda items are going to be taking place, assuming there'll be something to do with cost sharing of US forces here. But overall, we have the date, and Lee will be in the US for 3 days. And so, yeah, there should be some more details coming out in days to come.
Right. And Raphael, there's also talk about President Lee Jae Myung sitting down with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba within this month. What do we know about that potential meeting as of now?
Right, so both the Korean and Japanese governments are coordinating with President Lee Jae Myung's office to basically coordinate his visit, hopefully at the end of August, according to Japanese media and other diplomatic sources. And of course, this coordination has gained attention following confirmation that Lee will be meeting President Trump in Washington at the end of the month. And so I think the timing reflects, I guess, practical considerations as both countries work through bilateral issues amidst broader trilateral discussions with Washington. And I think we've seen that Lee's approach to Japan has changed considerably over the past few months or years, I guess, since taking office. Just after he was inaugurated in June, he told Prime Minister Ishiba that the strategic importance of the South Korea-Japan relationship is growing in today's environment, marking a shift from his previous criticism of Japan, of the trilateral cooperation under Yoon that we saw in 2023 with the Camp David summit, which at the time he called a grave mistake. So I do see that there's been a bit of a shift in the rhetoric, and even just yesterday, Japanese Agriculture Minister came to Seoul for a visit and addressed Japan's push for South Korea to lift the import restrictions that were imposed on seafood imports after the Fukushima disaster. So again, there might be some unresolved issues to come, but overall, Japanese officials, I think they've praised Lee for his so-called pragmatic diplomacy, with Ishiba's special advisor on national security recently saying that Japan has big expectations of Lee's new direction. And of course, this comes amidst the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the two sides. And this would be potentially the first bilateral meeting between when Lee goes abroad. Of course, whether or not it happens before or after Trump, we have yet to see.
Right, and staying with that, Professor Choi, what would be the diplomatic implications of a summit visit to Japan by the South Korean leader prior to a similar trip to the US, if of course the scheduling does indeed turn out that way?
Well, if the summit in Japan happens before the one in Washington, I think it will send an important signal. So it will show that the Seoul values Tokyo as much as Washington, and that Korea and Japan ties are a very important partnership on their own, not just part of a Korea-US alliance. The timing is also important. So this year is the 60th anniversary of the Korea-Japan diplomatic relation, and therefore both sides are trying to move beyond the past historical tensions and build a more future-oriented partnership. And for this reason, President Lee and Prime Minister Ishiba, they both have stressed the importance of mutual respect and trust. And also, we are seeing more uncertainty in world affairs today. And as we know, the United States is taking a very tough trade policy, and also there is some possibility of the changing role of American troops stationed in East Asia. So in this uncertain situation, the close cooperation between Korea and Japan is more important than ever. So I think this upcoming summit in Japan is not just symbolic, it lays the foundation for close cooperation and deeper dialogue between the two countries at a time when both South Korea and Japan share same uncertainty and challenges.
Right. Raphael, the Washington Post this past weekend published an extensive report that touched upon Mr. Trump's use of tariffs to promote America's security interests. That being said, it appears that his demands to descend on South Korea are forthcoming. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So the Washington Post reported that Trump's administration has basically been using tariffs far more extensively than previously known, essentially weaponizing trade policy to achieve a range of national security objectives beyond simple trade balance concerns. So according to the Washington Post, which cites internal government documents, Trump's team has been linking trade negotiations directly to security demands that wouldn't traditionally appear in commercial agreements. For South Korea's part, or South Korea specifically, this reportedly included pushing Seoul to increase defense spending from the current 2.6% of GDP to 3.8%, so nearly 50% increase, and also demanding public support for expanding the US Forces Korea's strategic flexibility, that is to say, using USFK assets for broader regional operations to better deal with or deter China, whilst also continuing to, of course, deal with or deter North Korea. The issue about shared the burden of sharing the costs of hosting the USFK was also seems to have been mentioned, and also Seoul's contribution to covering a bit more of the share. And if we remember well, the defense burden sharing demands are nothing new from Trump, who during his first term brought this up and tried to push South Korea to increase cost sharing contributions from around $900 million to $5 billion, so essentially a five-fold increase. That was at the time. Those negotiations basically stalled for over 18 months and weren't resolved until Biden took office. So I think there might be more to come, especially when the two meet in Washington at the end of the month. And I think this approach represents what officials are calling not a very traditional way of doing a trade agreement, but this strategy appears to be designed to basically pressure key allies near China or in this region into closer defense relationships, including equipment purchases and expanded cooperation.
Right, the Trump administration has called for increased burden sharing with its allies. That being said, Professor Choi, what are the prospects with regard to talks on defense cost sharing between South Korea and the US, do you think?
Yes, as Raphael just mentioned, President Trump may link tariff and defense cost sharing together in the upcoming negotiation. So this means that the talks in Washington will be very difficult. The President Trump is likely to begin with a very high demand, for example, asking Korea to almost double its defense cost sharing. And he may also want Korea to openly support for the strategic flexibility of American troops in South Korea, including in possible situation in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea. So from Korean perspective, we should be very firm, but also practical as well. So we need to gain some room for negotiation in Washington. To do this, we may have to show a degree of support for some key parts of Washington's security agenda. And one of them is, as I said earlier, the strategic flexibility of USFK. So this could mean more missions beyond the Korean Peninsula, such as near Taiwan or in the South China Sea. But at the same time, we must clearly say that any decision for Korean troops to join combat, especially in a direct fight against China, will be our own choice. And we can also point out that the Korea is already giving strong support to the United States. We are hosting American troops, and also we are paying major cost for military base in Pyeongtaek, and also we help strengthen deterrence against North Korea. And also we should explain that too much increase in defense cost sharing could weaken Korean public support for the alliance. So my view is that the talks in Washington will be tough, but in the end, our strategy should be balanced between protecting our own national security interests and also avoiding unnecessary conflict with Donald Trump.
Right, for sure. Raphael, a new U.S. national defense strategy is expected to be disclosed as early as this month. Now, for the sake of our viewers who may not be familiar with this document, could you tell us a bit about the NDS and the potential impact of the new strategy on the ROK-US alliance?
I think, well, as Professor Choi alluded, I think for the US, China is a very big issue. And when we look at the details of this new revised document, I think we can see a lot of this transpiring. So the National Defense Strategy is essentially the Pentagon's master document that sets America's strategic priorities and military objectives. It's typically released every 4 years, and guides everything from defense spending to troop deployments globally. The Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has directed Pentagon Policy Chief Elbridge Colby to complete the new document, the NDS, by the 31st of August, so at the end of this month. And he called it the single most important document to ensure the department is operating in accordance with the President's and my intent. Again, we'll have to see what the final document reveals, but this version seems to represent a fundamental shift towards what officials are calling America first and peace through strengths, with China specifically designated as the primary pacing threat. As for the ROK-US alliance, I think the implications are quite significant, as Professor Choi mentioned, and the strategy explicitly prioritizes Indo-Pacific operations over global commitments, which means the USFK's mission seems to be expanding beyond just deterring North Korea. And I think we're seeing this especially, for example, with the new USFK Commander General Brunson, who acknowledged the other day that the US forces in Korea now face a nuclear-armed adversary to the north, increased involvement by Russia alongside the DPRK, and the broader threat posed by China. So this definitely seems to be a new a new way for the US to be approaching the region, and we cannot understate or overstate the importance of the burden-sharing pressures that will likely come up over coming weeks, if not months. And again, the Pentagon has indicated that South Korea and other Asian allies are subject to the new kind of global standard of spending 5% of their GDP on defense. So I think we will definitely see this burden-sharing issue coming up probably again and again. I think this represents what officials call the alliance modernization. I think it's a good word, whether we agree with it or not. It's definitely a new way in the region, essentially repurposing the USFK for broader regional contingencies, while of course maintaining a strong posture when it comes to North Korea.
You're right. Brunson also talked about the importance of defense skill, I believe, over defense size when he was speaking to the South Korean press corps. Professor Choi, how feasible is it for South Korea to advance its alliance with the US under strategic flexibility, as you mentioned earlier, while maintaining a practical diplomatic approach to ties with China and, of course, North Korea?
In today's security environment, where the United States is openly linking trade and security together, the old approach of maintaining some balance between Washington, Beijing, and Pyongyang is no longer possible, I think. So therefore, on security matters at least, the South Korea should focus on maintaining and strengthening trilateral security cooperation with the United States and Japan. And therefore, in upcoming summit meeting in Washington, the Seoul should also express the principled support for key parts of Washington's security agenda, including the strategic flexibility of USFK and also stronger trilateral security cooperation to balance against China. But at the same time, we should also work to avoid any direct military clash with China. And also we need to maintain trade with China as smooth as possible. So this will help protect our economic stability, and also it will help reduce the risk of unnecessary confrontation with China. Also, with North Korea, we must hold a firm line on deterrence, sanction, and also rapid response to missile or any military threat. But we should also keep small and practical opportunities on the table, such as cooperation on health, disaster relief, or talks to prevent the military incidents. So there is always paths back to dialogue when conditions allow.
Right. Meanwhile, moving forward, Raphael, Seoul has delayed a decision on Google's request for permission to export map data. Now, again, could you give us some context behind this situation?
Sure. So South Korea has postponed its decision on Google's mapping data request for the second time this year on Friday, and has been extending the deadline by another 60 days. So hopefully we'll see a decision in October. And this seems to be a bit of a recurring pattern. Google's first request came back in 2007 and again in 2016. So this is the third time. I think the core issue here is that Google wants to export South Korea's detailed map data to its overseas servers, which would finally enable full navigation functionality on Google Maps. That basically means at the moment we can use Google Maps but only look at points of interest, whether it's a bakery or a business or a restaurant, but you can't actually navigate. And Google wants to use this data, bring it on their servers abroad, a bit of calculation processing on the servers globally so that it can be viewed in real time with low latency for any user around the world. That's basically what Google wants. But Seoul's position has been over the past basically almost 2 decades has been national security concerns. Officials argue that as South Korea is in a state of war, technically with North Korea, detailed mapping data could potentially reveal sensitive military installations and facilities to the enemy. Google's stance, on the other hand, is that these security concerns are technically unfounded because the same data has already undergone some security screening process and is the same data that is being used by local rivals here in Korea. The Korean government says, well, you can make data centers in Korea, which Google has refused, but even if they did make data center in Korea, that doesn't resolve the problem of exporting the data to be calculated on a global scale. So that's basically what's happening. I guess we have yet to see again what the decision will be, and who knows, this might even be a part of a greater agenda related to the upcoming summit between Trump and President Lee.
Right. That being said, Professor Choi, do the roadblocks faced by Google Maps here in South Korea look to affect the course of trade and defense talks between Seoul and Washington, do you think?
I think this dispute on Google Map data could definitely influence the bigger talks between Washington and Seoul on trade and defense cost sharing. From the American perspective, the Trump administration sees this Korean ban on exporting high-precision map data as a kind of non-tariff barrier. So this means Washington may bring up this issue together with other topics, such as tariff and defense cost sharing. So in actual negotiation, this issue could be used as a bargaining chip of Washington to push Korea for more market access. But from Korean point of view, the government is worried about 2 things. The first one is about security concern. It was already explained by Raphael, but there's another concern. So there is an economic concern as well. If Google gets this data, it could help American companies like Waymo enter the Korean autonomous driving market, which may hurt local taxi and delivery services. So because of this kind of a reason, there could be some disagreement and some negotiation between Seoul and Washington, and therefore this topic will be an important part of the upcoming summit in Washington.
I see. Well, I suppose we'll know for sure on August 25th when the 2 leaders meet at the White House. Professor Choi, as always, thank you so much for your insights today.
Very much.
And Raphael, as always, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Do join us again, same time tomorrow.